So welcome to our fourth segment of classes on philosophy. This is the fourth one in a row. It started about 2 years ago with philosophy and the midnight sun, then continued with idea of the university, and last time it was Eureka. We changed our minds and our worlds. This time, welcome to our party with gods who failed. In this class, there will be quite a few blasphemies, for which anywhere else in the world, not only I, but all of you could be sentenced to death. It is not an easy world we live in. You probably have heard that Pakistani ambassador, a lady, who resides in Washington, D.C., was accused of blasphemy in Pakistan. And fatwa was issued on her, and she could be sentenced to death. Pakistani ambassador in the United States. So for minor things we will be mentioning here in this class, somewhere else in the world all of us could be sentenced to death. So it is kind of encouragement that we live in a country where we can do things and challenge official dogmas. In all fields of human activities, from religion to science, to philosophy, mathematics, logic, all of them, as we are fully aware, are human products. But in all of them, there were dogmas established which lasted for millennia before some courageous mind came and challenged them. In all fields, in mathematics for more than 2,000 years in Euclidean geometry was based on a notion of axioms. Axioms were regarded as clear, distinct, self-evident truth. What follows? Nothing new can come. For more than 2,000 years, humanity followed blindly these definitions. Clear, distinct, self-evident truth. You would never dare to say, no, it is not clear to me, because, or it is not self-evident. This would be a blasphemy. For more than 2,000 years, people were like sheep, following the leader. And those who dared to challenge it were excluded from the society, excluded from a learned group of intelligentsia, and it lasted practically until the 19th century, when even the great professor of mathematics, Gauss, was afraid. He mentioned it could be otherwise. It was the problem of fifth postulate, parallel postulate. He himself was afraid to come up with it and announce it to the world. So he had young students, as I have here, And so I will tell you how you can run away with it, And all of a sudden, overnight, there were 3 youngsters, his students, who questioned this fifth postulate. What is this fifth postulate? very simple. Through the point next to a line, there can be one and only one parallel drawn. Clear, distinct, self-evident. No question asked. For more than 2,000 years, nobody dared to question it. Really, how far do you know that these two parallels never meet? Up to the ceiling. How do you know that above the ceiling they don't meet? You assume that they do not meet. My God, could axioms be assumptions? What would it mean? That you can assume something on your own? Of course you could. This 2,000 years belief all of a sudden was changed. And there were many other things following it. You know. A triangle, which is Pythagorean triangle, is 180 degrees. What about if we have a triangle which, this is one of the triangles. There were 3 students, I give it. One of them was Russian, Lobachevsky. The other one was Hungarian, Polai. And the third one was German, Riemann. Each of them assumed something else about this fifth postulate, and all of a sudden there were 3 other geometries. So not only one Euclidean, of course the Euclidean was about the world, and the world can have only one geometry. Now all of a sudden you have 3 more. My God, it is probably not about the world. Maybe about the world of our minds. Maybe everything is coming from within our minds. Okay. I have forgotten what I wanted to write. Okay.
You can raise the screen over there at that table, make the screen go up.
So, from the traditional Euclidean triangle, angles inside of the triangle is 180 degrees. If you have this kind of triangle, then it will be more than 180 degrees. And here, less. These are surprises which follow. We had to wait 2,000 years for that. Axioms are assumptions.
Isn't it just a change in definition?
Definition, yes. Straight line, what is straight line? If you assume the straight line, you know, in modern geometry, you know, is effect, there are no straight lines. There is not even time. You can change. Our time is running, I know. You see what a kind of freedom you acquire with the change from axioms, clear, distinct, self-evident truth, to assumptions. All of you have right to assume. And we do. But what follows is a completely new world in which we live. It was so easy to be a part of sheep following some leader. And I'm saying not only in religion, it was in science, in mathematics, in logic. So far, mathematics, this exact science, you know, When you see things can be otherwise. By the way, the man who produced this philosophy, everything can be otherwise, was a Scottish philosopher, David Hume. For that, he never was able to get a job. He was ostracized by his society, and everybody was afraid of him. He said, sun does not have to rise tomorrow. And the people around were, my God, who can dare to say something? The sun has to rise. And he said, no, sun does not have to rise. For that, he never was able to get a job at the university or anywhere. So he was teaching crazy aristocrats, and he was diplomat, but he never was able to land a decent job in his society, because he said everything can be otherwise. British people are great people, but they had also great superstitions. One of their superstitions was the traditional belief in induction, that human knowledge is collected by previous experience. And this future experience will resemble the past. So future has to resemble the past, because I have experienced it. You see, this was traditional belief of British empiricists. And average Briton believed that this is the case. Hume said everything can be otherwise, because the future doesn't have to resemble what I have experienced in the past. A courageous man who paid his due for it. But there are all other fields in which we have been accustomed to accept it blindly, what we were taught. In school, you got an A when you repeated what your professor said. And it is nice to have an A, straight A's. So we kept repeating very often nonsense. Again, not only in religion, but in mathematics, in logic, in science. Because we have a certain inclination to be part of a herd and to blindly follow, so that we don't have to think. Thinking hurts. And those who dare to think, they were punished correspondingly. I will be mentioning other fields. You know, in logic, for instance, it is clear that things are or they are not. Great Aristotle generalized this finding that things either is or is not. What is. I could not question it, could you? The second law of thought, that first law of thought. What is. Second law is what is not. So even better, I would never question that. What is not is not. And because of first law and second law, either it is or it is not. That's it, the best one. The third one. Either or. And this is what we use in our intercourse. Everything is based on the first one, identity, what is. Second one, what is not. Either or. That is our Western logic. it would be difficult to think that it could be otherwise. It is difficult to figure out how it could be otherwise. We kept repeating, teaching logic since the time of Aristotle. Up to my years here, 50 years ago, and when I interjected that it could be otherwise, but it was not in the book. Our books were still written the old way. We didn't know at that time, or we ignored it, that there can be a different concept, assumption, and it came from the Orient. And our Western logic is like this: 1, 2. Either 1 or 2. Either that one or that one. Either or. We didn't know about what Chinese logic was. It was a complementary logic, when one and the other one are closely connected. There is no excluded middle. You can say either or. No, they are always holding hands together. You know? If you accept this Chinese one, and after so many good things we buy from China so cheap, you know, why not to take this one and start thinking about the implications of this one? You see, excluded middle does not exist. It was so difficult to accept it in the West that when the man who introduced it, Niels Bohr, in Copenhagen around 1918, 1920, when he introduced it, he called it principle of complementarity. Not complementarity. He didn't know that this existed. In his study of particle physics, quantum physics, he discovered that there is something wrong with our way of thinking, which interprets the world we cannot sense. You know what we had in our Western tradition. What you cannot sense is nonsense. That's a great axiom about science. What you cannot sense is nonsense. Great part of thinking in 20th century would be nonsense. Niels Bohr went beyond that. And he introduced this principle of complementarity, which excludes excluded middle. So he just strikes it. There is no excluded middle. Applied to quantum physics, there is a particle and a speed. Both of them are complementary. You cannot use our Western way of thinking either or. So you have to change the thinking in quantum physics in order to embrace it. It was difficult for humanity of 20th century to accept it. That you have to change your mind to change the world. Our mind are reflexes of the world. 5 senses. I capture the world, store it in my storage here, and kick it out. You see, it's a different ball game, what is being introduced here. And this is what represents the greatest revolution in 20th century. A close collaborator of Niels Bohr, when I talked about it 50 years ago, students told me, you know, he really was a bore. He was a great man. It was difficult to sell it, you know. Just his name for the whole idea. His close German collaborator was Werner Heisenberg. Werner Heisenberg, after influenced by this changed way of thinking, had a very serious problem. And it was his doubts about possibility of figuring out at the same time the speed of the particle and position of the particle. This was the condition of last 300 years. In order to know, we have to know, you know, the speed, 40 miles an hour, and position. I am both speed and position. If you do not know both, you don't know. In order to know, you have to know both. Werner Heisenberg was puzzled with it. And as many of his predecessors, he left into a desert to be with his own thinking. But if you are familiar with area between Copenhagen and Hamburg, there is no desert. There are big rocks. And the sea is beating the rock, boom, boom, boom. So this was where Heisenberg went. He wanted to be alone just with himself. And it was here, near Helgoland, where he got this principle he called principle of uncertainty. All through the history, man had one desire, to have certainty. Religion was here to produce this certainty. Logic, mathematics, science supply this desire to be certain. Heisenberg formulates principle of uncertainty. Difficult to comprehend for 20th century mind. After complementarity, there is where are you going to stop? You are taking apart the house, there is nothing left. All of these principles, you know, how far do you dare to go? Logic is changed, mathematics is changed. Physics is going to be changed. A man who was bad student, Einstein, he never amounted very much in school. And now he comes with these ideas, you know. It is a crazy century. New ideas which cannot be accepted have to be rejected by sound mind. Maybe that mind was not so sound. So here came change again. And the changes followed. I was fortunate to meet Werner Heisenberg. I was in his seminar and, in '64. And he was a great man, but not very popular among other physicists because he returned to Germany in 1939 on the last boat which went back to Germany. All his young years he spent in Copenhagen. And when he was at Princeton with Einstein and other physicists and mathematicians, they tried to convince him, please stay here, don't go back to Germany. And Heisenberg answered, Die Heimat ruft mich. My homeland is calling me. He was a German nationalist. He returned to Germany, stayed during the war in Germany. Completely cut off from his friend Bohr. At the end of the war, he was sent to Copenhagen to meet his friend Bohr and to find out from Bohr how far he is aware about development of atom bomb in the West. This was the last meeting and the last bit of trust disappeared. Heisenberg returned to Germany, survived the war. After the war, he was lucky to be captured by Americans. Americans captured the core of German science. Also those who played a very important role in Peenemünde. Peenemünde was the center from which the rockets V1, V2 were sent over London. So Americans were able to save these German scientists, brought them to the United States. But before, some of them were brought to the United States where they willingly left. Heisenberg was stationed near Cambridge University together with other scientists, German scientists. And they were there in August 1945 when they listened to the news that Americans exploded atom bomb over Japan. What followed was heated discussion among German physicists. Everything was caught on tape. Heisenberg's argument, it is impossible, we were so close, Americans could have never done it. And they started fighting among themselves. Everything was on a tape. After I escaped to Austria, after 5 years of hiding in Czechoslovakia, I was not trusted by Americans. So they investigated me as a possible Russian spy. But during the investigations in Vienna, and this was the time of Vienna which some of you have seen in Orson Welles' Third Man. This was the Vienna. And I was investigated, moved to Linz by CIA, and they evidently did not trust me because I spoke Russian and German. They knew that I never had English in school, that I had French. So they thought that I was trained by Russians and sent to the West. But what happened, the American investigators in Vienna were young people. They were tired of being in the army. Their girlfriends were in the United States, and we became friends. And they told me about that they are impressed that I speak languages and I know about philosophy and philosophy of science. And they said, you know, you just have a bag too great, you know, to be believed in. They told me that, but we trust you. After 5 o'clock in the evening, I was invited by them to go to bar to have a drink. I thought this was a logical continuation of the investigation. You know. They told me, don't worry, we work until 5. Have a drink. So I had drinks with them. And I still believe they continue, you know. But these were Americans. Only until 5 o'clock, you know. To hell with everything else. So I stayed about 3-4 months being investigated. And then a big boss of CIA came and he told me, you know, I want to trust you. Why don't you? You know, I have been hiding 5 years and I have nothing to hide. He said, it is very improbable, but I trust you. Tell me, you know, I have a document which is not supposed to be talked about. This document was made with German scientists at a place near Cambridge University at the end of the Second World War. Can you listen to it and give us a comment? I tell you, top secret. It cannot be released to general public until about 40 years. So I was very pleased, unexpected. Something, you know, why should I give a comment? So I listened to it. And what I listened to was the battle between German scientists and Heisenberg. Was the leader who was skeptical about American ability to build atom bomb. I learned that, and I knew I have to keep my mouth shut. I tried to, it was difficult. Until one day, I was accepted by Heisenberg to be in his seminar in southern Bavaria, 1964. After, or during the break, we were sitting, drinking good Bavarian beer, and it was jolly, you know, good buddies, and I could not help and asked Professor Heisenberg about the meeting, and he got itchy. And he said, what? And I was fool enough I have listened to the tape. He said, impossible. I thought that British were gentlemen. They would not do anything like this. I said, Professor Heisenberg, you are very naive. You were a prisoner. I told him what he said. He was very upset. And he admitted that it was the case, but he was upset that it is out. And I was very careful later. I was waiting until 92 when it was officially. So by that time, Heisenberg was 20 years dead. And so everybody, I can disclose it, everybody knows it. All birds now know it, you know. And so this was Heisenberg, a great scientist, but a human being who loved his country, who returned and paid his due for his nationalism. So in all of these fields, as I mentioned, religion, science, mathematics, logic, you know, we had established dogmas, and there were courageous people who had guts to announce something new. Without exception, they had to pay for it, because the majority of people is not ready to accept it, and the worth is the learned community which can destroy you. When they are unified, they won't give you a chance. Einstein was so great in his thinking. After he announced his special theory of relativity, he said, go ahead and verify it. I have done everything I could. It is up to you to verify. And the others did. He said, hooray, thank you. And it was not him who was pushing the car. But even that, after, when he was growing old, he lived at Princeton University. His second great theory of general relativity, unified field theory, was not verified. Not only not verified, but really killed by young physicists. They felt that Einstein was senile, running out of energy, unable to contribute something what they were doing in particle physics, you know. So he lived as most prestigious scientist of 20th century in Princeton. Next to him was another one, Kurt Gödel, Viennese, who also ran out of energy. They became good friends. They walked every day in Princeton together, thinking about nature of cosmos, creating a new theory of returning universes. Nobody else understood them. They were senile, too senile people, so. Gödel left behind, greatest discovery of human thinking that we cannot prove from within any system of mathematics or anything. we have to go outside and say, oh, that's correct, oh, that's true. And then this statement, that's correct, I have to go and call from outside. You cannot prove anything from within. This is fate of human mind. But Gödel himself lost contact with logicians and mathematicians. In addition to it, he was a little bit crazy, indeed crazy. He was afraid that they were going to poison him. He refused to take meals. He died 65 pounds heavy. I was fortunate to be friend of his only student he had, Hao Wang, Chinese student. When he came with his paper to Professor Gödel at Princeton, Professor Gödel opened the door ajar just about half an inch, and Hao Wang pushed the paper in, very often slamming his fingers in the door. So this was the only meeting they had, through the door partially opened ajar. So Hao Wang appreciated Gödel very much. He knew that he was one of the greatest minds history of mankind has produced. But at the end of his life, he ended up badly. He was the only friend Einstein had at Princeton. So a tragedy of old people. And so when I summarize it, all of these fields produce dogmas which were removed. Now it is up to us to continue and create something new. But for that, you need eurekas. This was the course we had last time. And the eurekas cannot be ordered, from Sears catalog. You cannot learn or pay for eurekas. Eureka is an occurrence you do not plan, which is a result of preoccupation with problem. It can happen, it doesn't have to happen. For more than 30 years, I was teaching a course in phenomenology, philosophy of Edmund Husserl, who tried to figure out nature of eureka. Rationally, what has to be done in our mind before you can start producing something new. His method was method of bracketing. You have to bracket your mind, eliminate everything about the problem you have read about by scientists, by anybody. You have a clear-cut problem you want to solve. Eliminate everything you ever read about it, you ever heard about it. Try to do it in your mind. It is a tremendous tension, just to push it. No, not that. No, don't bother me with what Aristotle or Plato said. I have a clear-cut problem I want to solve. What is happening in your mind that you will start remembering what you have learned before. You cannot help it. Now, if you succeed by eliminating all of these notions from the past and from your memory, all of a sudden something can happen. It doesn't have to happen. Then you start all over again. My students in philosophy love this method. When they had phenomenological final, at the end of the exam, they came and they said, nothing happened. nothing happened. I thought, thank you. So, how could I grade them? Nothing happened, really. We shook hands, nothing happened. So they love this method, but again, the method is the most rational attempt to capture possibility of having something new, eureka. And if you don't succeed, try again. Try again. Like the famous, experimentalists made 600 attempts before something happened. But this is the only way. In our present age, all of the past dogmas we have been able to eliminate are continued by our dogma about computer. How far can we really decipher ourselves? That's a question. During the last 300 years, there was a very dangerous scientific dogma which divided the world, and the idea came from great French philosopher René Descartes, who divided the world into material world and mental world. These two worlds, one is material, the other one is mental. There is really the material world which we observe. There are hard sciences dealing with material world, objective world. Here we have subjective world, soft world, soft sciences against hard sciences, materialism against spiritualism, subjectivism against objectivism. This was a great dogma of last 300 years, which most of us accepted as being truly scientific. People were rewarded according to those who worked on hard sciences against soft sciences. Psychology had a problem because it could never prove that it is a real science until they embrace the brain and make love to brain and talk only about brain, forgetting that they are talking. Subjective, objective. Also, this dogma had to go. It was difficult to accept this dogma among hard scientists. The man who contributed to removal of this dogma was Hungarian physicist Eugene Wigner. He connected hard and soft together, subjective and objective. It is subjective consciousness, conscious mind, which makes selection. Eugene Wigner, when he introduced it, was damned by most of the physicists. It was still difficult for him when he came here in about 82, and when we had a seminar about it. My friends in Geophysical Institute and other sciences, they were looking down at him. He was Nobel Prize winner, you know. But our great minds could not swallow that he brought mind and body, external world, internal world, together in form of consciousness. It is a conscious mind which is separate from the brain, which does something when it does something. We had about 30 students, almost a class, when we were arguing about it. Where do we go now from this, from your great discovery? And he told me, no, I did not get Nobel Prize for that. They cannot assess it yet. So this very idea, you know, which he had, fusing together, when you are investigating something, you know, you are not reading the book or making experiment, you know. You are attached with your senses and with your mind and something what I call demiurge in your mind, you know, which decides, you know, where you pay attention to, expecting eureka. Everything is fused together. There is no separation of hard and soft, you know. So to swallow this for our indoctrinated modern era was very difficult. We became very good friends with Eugene Wigner. I introduced him to various meetings in Austria, but I was not successful because he was sick. He was in Viennese hospital, dying. And last time when I saw him in Vienna, he told me, what I have really produced was fused men together. It should have never been separated. And our science is responsible for this dangerous separation of last 300 years. And he himself had to suffer from his colleagues. And again, at our university, our great minds were not convinced that he was right. Eugene Wigner is one of the great, like Einstein and Gödel. But he was not assessed at our university. He even was able to talk only with a philosopher, which indicates that he must have had a soft mind. So after this, you know, few remarks I have to make. You know, when you are older, you are fully aware that you cannot play this game, subjective, objective, more. In the last 50 years, it was clear to me. But the older I am, you know, I have to add my subjective, autobiographical, what I have experienced in my life, to the whole package of my life. I cannot separate it. And very often I have to be confessional, you know, about this integral unity of it. So I cannot separate the year 1949, and see it in connection just for me. This was the beginning of Cold War. My country, where I was born, was the last country occupied by Soviets. Czechoslovakia became integral part of Soviet-dominated Central and Eastern Europe. We were young. I was 19, 20 years old, underestimating conditions. We believe we can do something. We did. Before we realized, our whole group was arrested. I was the only one who escaped, who was not arrested. For 5 years I was hiding. My friends served 5, 10 years, released from the prison after working in uranium mines. And many of them didn't want to hear a word about politics. It came so far that in 1954, I could not have any more support. And the only support I was at the end getting was from my parents and from my relatives. We could not trust anybody. With help of my father, we conceived an escape in a railway train which carried coal from Czechoslovakia to Italy. So I have erected, with help of my father, a coffin, embedded it into the coal, covered with coal. And we knew conditions on the border where dogs were controlling underneath of the train, above the train, and from the side of the train. When I was in the coffin, a heavy dog, German Shepherd, landed just above my head. I was covered with mixture of vinegar, pepper, and salt. And I just felt, and he jumped away. It was not noticed by the secret policeman. The train moved to Austria. I ended up in Austria. This is this Orson Welles, Austria, Vienna, and everything what followed. It was 5 years later, so year 49 was kind of great memento for me. I connected it with 1848-49, the great Russian writer, one of the greatest writers, Fyodor Dostoevsky, was sentenced to death for his participation in revolution against Tsar. He was sentenced to death, and in the very last moment he was pardoned by gracious Tsar and sent to Siberia for 5 years. He went to Siberia, where he was arrested with greatest criminals of Russia. It was here where he learned about human psyche. This is what made out of him the greatest psychologist. One professor in Austria introduced his last lecture. What this man did not know about human nature is not worth knowing. So this was Fyodor Dostoevsky. Sentenced to death, returned to St. Petersburg after 5 years when he wrote all his great novels. Next to it, he was a sick man. He was epileptic. And not enough of that. He loved to play in casinos. He was addicted to casino. He dictated his books to secretaries who were writing down his novels. One after another one fell down exhausted. He finished, went to the publisher and give me the money. And off he went to Baden-Baden, you know. And he lost everything. And friends brought him back. He dictated another novel, got money, and off he went to Baden-Baden. Brothers Karamazov, one of the greatest novels ever written. So when you have a chance, give him a chance and read some of his work, Crime and Punishment. So this was 1849, 100 years before me. I did it 1949, and then paid for it, you know, for 5 years too. But then I was lucky. And if I am given life again, I would do exactly the same. All the dangers, I only feel sorry that I've caused so many problems to my parents and to my family. They had to pay for it. But they supported me to the very last moment. I was able to escape and start a new life. I met interesting people, not only here, but in America, but all over Europe, in Asia, in China. I have many Chinese friends. I'm proud that I have participated in Tiananmen Square. I had lectures. I didn't know what was coming, but I was invited at the same time. So students were excited about getting rid of Mao and communism, and they convinced me that I should, when I am teaching what whole Maoism and communism is, that I should go and march with them. So I marched with them with a sign until the day before they were crushed down. I had a friend who was member of Politburo. He was a Chinese philosopher I met at Wittgenstein conference in Western Europe. Communist member of Chinese Politburo who came at midnight and said, "You pack up. Within 10 minutes we are at the airport. You fly to Tokyo immediately." Why? I want to stay here. I have a meeting with students. Shut up. We were brought to the airplane. Off we went to Tokyo. During the flight, we heard about attack on students at Tiananmen Square. So he saved my life. And so it was exciting. I would live it probably again exactly same.
What about the casino part then? What about the casino part that you missed?
Yes, everything, everything. I would buy it. You know, also fear, you know, and sweat, you know. It goes with it. You know, it was not easy, you know, very often, but it was. Now, when I look back, it was exciting. very often painful. Now, before the last remarks, I mentioned Orson Welles and his film. How many of you have seen Third Man? Please see it again. I knew the composer of the song. He played it for me in his tavern 15 years later, Anton Karas. So after, I was lucky again. I wanted to study at the University of Vienna, and I was told that I cannot stay there because the first Bezirk is in the hands of Russians once in 3 months. And even they are not in possession of the place where university is, they have their agents and they would snap me away and arrest me. So one of the professors knew a professor in Innsbruck. He wrote him, here is somebody who wants to study philosophy of science. You know, I recommend him very highly. He seems to have a very good background. Can you take him? It was